The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Persian rug Robert and I had chosen together a lifetime ago. You need to find somewhere else to die, Victoria said, her voice flat and cold. I looked up from the photo album in my lap, stunned. Excuse me, I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Kevin, standing beside her, shifted uncomfortably, but didn't speak. Victoria sighed dramatically. You heard me. Find somewhere else to die. You're useless now. A wave of dizziness washed over me. Useless. I had dedicated my life to my family, to Robert, to her. I had nursed Robert through his final illness, barely sleeping, barely eating, my world shrinking to the confines of his hospital room. And now, just days after his funeral, my own daughter was telling me I was useless. Victoria, I said, my voice trembling, your father just passed. Exactly, she retorted, her eyes glinting. And now that he's gone, there's no reason for you to stay here. This house is too big for one person. It's wasteful. She glanced around the living room, her gaze lingering on the antique grandfather clock, a family heirloom. Kevin and I need more space, she continued, her tone softening slightly, though her eyes remained hard. We're planning to start a family soon. Start a family, I echoed, my mind reeling. But this is my home. I looked around at the familiar furniture, the photographs on the walls, each one a precious memory. Your father and I built this life together. Well, Dad's gone now, Victoria said bluntly, and frankly, you're a burden. You can barely take care of yourself. Kevin cleared his throat. Victoria, he murmured, placing a hand on her arm. Maybe we should know, Kevin, she snapped, shaking him off. She needs to understand. We can't afford to keep this place running. And with her medical bills, she trailed off, leaving the unspoken implication hanging in the air. My medical bills, I repeated, feeling a fresh surge of anger. I was perfectly healthy, aside from the occasional ache and pain that came with age. There's nothing wrong with me. Don't play coy, Mother, Victoria said, rolling her eyes. We both know you're not getting any younger. And with Dad gone, who's going to pay for your care? Certainly not us. She crossed her arms, a smug look on her face. So, like I said, you need to find somewhere else to go. Somewhere smaller, more manageable. My heart pounded in my chest, a mixture of hurt and disbelief warring within me. I couldn't believe the words coming out of my own daughter's mouth, the daughter I had raised, nurtured, and loved unconditionally. You're asking me to leave, I asked, my voice barely audible. Not asking, Victoria corrected, her tone sharp, telling. You have a week, she turned to leave, Kevin trailing behind her like a dutiful puppy. But where am I supposed to go? I called after them, my voice cracking. Victoria paused at the doorway, glancing back at me with an icy stare. That's not my problem, she said, her voice devoid of any warmth. Figure it out. And with that, they were gone, leaving me alone in the silence of the house that had once been my sanctuary, now filled with the bitter taste of betrayal. I sat there for a long time, numb with shock. The photo album slipped from my grasp, landing on the floor with a soft thud. I stared blankly at the smiling faces captured within its pages, memories of happier times, of family vacations, of birthdays and holidays. Now, All I felt was a hollow ache in my chest. Where was I supposed to go? I had no other family, no close friends. Robert had been my world, and now he was gone, and my own daughter had cast me aside like unwanted baggage. A single tear traced a path down my cheek, followed by another and another. I felt utterly lost, adrift in a sea of grief and uncertainty. But somewhere deep down, a flicker of resolve began to ignite. I wouldn't let them get away with this. I wouldn't let them leave me with nothing. I would find a way to fight back. I would find a way to reclaim what was rightfully mine. Rain lashed against the window pane, mimicking the storm raging inside me. Just weeks after burying Robert, my husband of 40 years, Victoria, my own daughter, stood in the doorway of our living room, a smug Kevin hovering behind her. "Mother," Victoria began, her voice dripping with false concern. "Kevin and I have been discussing, and we think it's best if you find somewhere else to, well, live. This house is too much for you to manage on your own." I stared at her, the words hitting me like a physical blow. "Too much for me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Victoria, this is my home. Robert and I built this life together." Kevin cleared his throat. "Mrs. Sullivan," he said, his tone condescending. "Victoria's right. This house is a lot to upkeep. It would be better for everyone if you moved to Asmiller Place. Something more manageable." I felt a cold dread creep up my spine. They were kicking me out of my own home. The home Robert and I had shared, filled with a lifetime of memories. "Where do you expect me to go?" I asked, my voice trembling. Victoria shrugged, her eyes flitting around the room, already assessing how she would rearrange the furniture. "There are plenty of assisted living facilities," she offered, her voice devoid of any warmth. "Or perhaps a nice little apartment," Kevin added, patting Victoria's arm. "We'll help you find something suitable, of course. Suitable for them, perhaps. Suitable for erasing me from the picture, so they could claim Robert's legacy as their own." I clutched the armrest of my favorite chair, the worn velvet a comfort against my shaking hands. "Robert," I started, but my voice choked with emotion. "Robert would never have allowed this." Victoria sighed dramatically. "Mother, please don't be difficult. Daddy's gone." And frankly, she leaned closer, her voice hardening. "He left everything to me. This house, his investments, everything." My breath caught in my throat. Everything. Robert and I had built our lives together, brick by brick, investment by investment. He wouldn't cut me out. He wouldn't leave me destitute. Something wasn't right. I need some air," I mumbled, rising unsteadily to my feet. I walked towards the French doors leading to the garden, needing to escape the suffocating presence of my daughter and her husband. The cool, damp air hit my face, offering a momentary respite from the turmoil inside. I stood there, watching the rain fall, feeling a profound sense of loss. Robert was gone. My home was being stolen. I had nothing left, or so I thought. A tiny flicker of defiance ignited within me. Robert was a meticulous man, a shrewd businessman. He wouldn't simply leave everything to Victoria without considering me. He knew his daughter's tendencies. He wouldn't leave me vulnerable. This had to be some sort of misunderstanding. I turned back towards the house, my resolve hardening. "I'll be packing my things," I said, my voice steadier now. Victoria smirked. Good. We'll have movers here tomorrow morning. Try not to make a fuss, Mother. It will only make things more difficult. Difficult for whom, I wondered. Difficult for them to watch me crumble. Difficult for them to enjoy their ill-gotten gains while their mother was out on the street. I returned to the living room, my gaze sweeping over the familiar furniture, the photographs on the mantelpiece, the paintings Robert and I had collected over the years. Every object, every corner of this house held a memory. They couldn't take those away from me. Not yet. I went upstairs to my bedroom, the silence amplifying the hollow ache in my chest. I opened my jewelry box, my fingers tracing the delicate silver locket Robert had given me on our anniversary. Inside, nestled against the faded velvet lining, was a small, folded piece of paper. I hadn't noticed it before. Carefully, I unfolded the paper. It was a note, written in Robert's familiar hand. My dearest Margaret, it read, if you are reading this, it means something has gone terribly wrong. I know my Victoria. I've tried to guide her, to instill in her the values we cherish. But I also know the influence Kevin holds over her. I've made arrangements to protect you, my love. See Mr. Thompson. He'll know what to do. Mr. Thompson, our family lawyer. Robert, he had planned for this. He had anticipated this betrayal. A glimmer of hope flickered within me, fragile yet persistent. Perhaps, just perhaps, I wasn't as powerless as they thought. I closed my eyes, clutching the note to my chest. Robert, even in death, was protecting me. The rain continued to fall, but the storm within me had begun to subside, replaced by a quiet determination. I would see Mr. Thompson. I would find out what Robert had arranged, and then I would decide what to do next. Rain lashed against the grimy window of the motel room, each drop a tiny hammer blow against my already fractured spirit. $200. That's all I had left. $200 to my name after Victoria, my own flesh and blood, threw me out of my home. Find somewhere else to die. Mother, she'd sneered. Kevin lurking behind her with a smug look plastered on his face. This is our house now. The memory of their callous faces, their utter lack of empathy, made my stomach churn. I sat on the edge of the lumpy mattress, the thin blanket offering little comfort against the chill that seeped into my bones. The air hung heavy with the smell of stale cigarettes and cheap air freshener, a stark contrast to the familiar lavender scent of my own bedroom. My bedroom. The thought of it brought fresh tears to my eyes. It wasn't just a room. It was a sanctuary filled with memories of Robert, of happier times, of a life that now felt like a distant dream. I fumbled in my worn purse for a tissue, my hand brushing against Robert's old pocket watch. I pulled it out, the cool metal a small comfort against my palm. He'd given it to me on our 10th anniversary. Time is precious. Margaret, he'd said, his eyes twinkling, especially the time we spent together. Now, time felt like my enemy, stretching endlessly before me, a vast and empty expanse I had no idea how to navigate. I opened the watch, tracing the inscription inside. To my beloved Margaret, forever and always, forever and always. He hadn't meant for forever to be spent huddled in a dingy motel room, stripped of everything I held dear. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, adding to the oppressive atmosphere. I closed my eyes, trying to block out the noise, the smell, the suffocating reality of my situation. Just yesterday, I'd been in my own home, surrounded by the familiar comforts I'd known for decades. Now, I was a stranger in a strange land, adrift in a sea of uncertainty. The harsh words of Victoria echoed in my ears. "You're a burden, Mother. You're draining our resources." Had I truly become a burden? I'd always tried to be a good mother, a supportive wife. I'd dedicated my life to my family, putting their needs before my own. And this was my reward. I opened my eyes, a flicker of defiance igniting within me. No, I wouldn't let them break me. I wouldn't let their cruelty define the rest of my life. I would find a way to survive, to rebuild, to reclaim some semblance of dignity. But how? The question hung in the air, heavy and unanswered. I had no job, no prospects, no support system. My friends, mostly Robert's colleagues and their wives, had drifted away after his passing. Victoria had made sure of that, subtly isolating me, poisoning their minds against me with whispers of my supposed failing health and increasing dependence. I looked around the cramped room, taking in the peeling wallpaper, the stained carpet, the flickering television bolted to the wall. This couldn't be my life. I wouldn't allow it. I had to do something, anything, to change my circumstances. But what could I do? $200 wouldn't last long. I'd have to find a job, a place to live, a way to rebuild my life from scratch. The thought was daunting, overwhelming. I felt a wave of despair wash over me, threatening to pull me under. I clutched Robert's watch tighter, drawing strength from the memory of his love, his unwavering support. He wouldn't want me to give up. He'd want me to fight. A sudden thought pierced through the fog of despair. Robert's will. He'd been meticulous about his affairs, always ensuring everything was in order. He'd spent weeks working on his will, revising it, refining it. He'd even consulted with a lawyer, a man named Mr. Henderson, to ensure everything was legally sound. "I want to make sure you're taken care of, Margaret," he'd said, a serious look on his face, "no matter what." At the time, I dismissed his concerns, attributing them to his usual cautious nature. But now, his words took on a new meaning, a glimmer of hope in the darkness. Could there be something in the will, something Robert had put in place to protect me? I hadn't paid much attention to the details during the reading. Victoria had been so efficient, so eager to take control. She'd presented a document, claiming it was Robert's will, and I, in my grief-stricken state, hadn't questioned it. Now, doubt gnawed at me. Had Victoria been entirely honest? Had she shown me the real will? A sudden urge to contact Mr. Henderson, Robert's lawyer, washed over me. He would have a copy of the original will. He could tell me what it actually said. I rummaged through my purse again, finding a crumpled business card with Mr. Henderson's name and number. My hands trembled as I dialed, a sliver of hope blossoming in my chest. The phone rang, each ring echoing the frantic beat of my heart. Finally, a voice answered. "Henderson and Associates. How can I help you, Mr. Henderson?" I said, my voice shaky. "This is Margaret Sullivan, Robert Sullivan's wife." There was a pause, a moment of silence that felt like an eternity. Then Mr. Henderson's voice, warm and familiar, filled my ear. "Mrs. Sullivan, of course. How are you doing?" His voice was kind, concerned. I hesitated, unsure how to begin. "Not well, I'm afraid," I finally admitted, the words catching in my throat. I need to talk to you about Robert's will." I explained my situation. The eviction, Victoria's cruelty, the gnawing suspicion that something wasn't right. Mr. Henderson listened patiently, his silence a comforting presence. When I finished, he sighed softly. "Mrs. Sullivan," he said, his voice grave, "I think you need to come to my office. There are some things we need to discuss." His words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. A sudden premonition, a feeling of anticipation, washed over me. Perhaps, just perhaps, Robert had anticipated this, had planned for it. Maybe, just maybe, there was a light at the end of this dark tunnel. "I'll be there first thing tomorrow morning," I said, my voice filled with a newfound resolve. The rain continued to beat against the window, but the sound no longer felt like a hammer blow. It felt like a drumbeat, a rhythm of hope echoing in the night. The thin motel curtains did little to block the harsh morning light. I woke up stiff and sore, the cheap mattress a poor substitute for my own bed. My own bed, the thought stung. "Find somewhere else to die," Victoria had said, her voice dripping with disdain. Those words echoed in my head, a cruel mantra to the tune of the rumbling refrigerator in the corner of the room. I sat up, pushing aside the scratchy blanket, and reached for the small, worn notebook where I kept important numbers. Robert always handled the legal and financial matters. I wasn't even sure who his lawyer was. I flipped through the pages, my hand trembling slightly. There it was, Charles Blackwood, attorney at law. Beneath the name, a number. I took a deep breath and dialed. A crisp, professional voice answered. "Blackwood and Associates. How can I help you?" "My name is Margaret Sullivan," I said, my voice catching slightly. "I'm Robert Sullivan's wife." "Oh, Mrs. Sullivan, I was so sorry to hear about Robert's passing. He was a good man." There was a pause, a subtle shift in tone. "How can I assist you?" I need to speak with you about his will," I managed, feeling a knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. I'm not sure what to do." "Of course," he said, his voice regaining its professional smoothness. "Could you come to the office tomorrow morning? Say 10 o'clock. "Yes," I replied. "Yes, 10 o'clock will be fine." We exchanged a few more pleasantries, and I hung up the phone, a sliver of hope beginning to pierce the fog of despair. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, replaying the events of the past few weeks, the shock of Robert's sudden illness, the whirlwind of the hospital, his final moments, and then Victoria and Kevin descending like vultures. "We need to talk about the future," Kevin had said, his eyes fixed on the family portraits adorning the hallway, calculating their worth. No doubt, Victoria hadn't even waited for the funeral to be over before she started making arrangements to sell the house. "It's too big for you now, Mom," she'd said, not unkindly, but with an underlying firmness that brooked no argument. "You could downsize. Find somewhere smaller, more manageable." Manageable. The word felt like a slap. I had lived in that house for over 40 years. It was filled with memories, with Robert's presence. Now, I was adrift, banished to a cheap motel room with nothing but the clothes on my back and a few meager possessions. The motel room felt stifling. I paced back and forth, the stale air heavy with the scent of disinfectant and despair. The television droned mindlessly in the background, offering no solace. I tried to read, but the words blurred on the page. My mind raced, a whirlwind of anger, grief, and a growing sense of injustice. How could Victoria do this to me, her own mother? I had dedicated my life to her, to their family. I had nursed Robert through his final days, holding his hand, whispering words of love and comfort. And this was my reward, to be cast aside like a broken toy, deemed unworthy of even a place to grieve in peace. Sleep eluded me. I tossed and turned, the cheap sheets clinging uncomfortably to my skin. The hum of the refrigerator became a mocking lullaby, a constant reminder of my predicament. Images flashed through my mind. Victoria's cold, calculating gaze, Kevin's smug smile, the empty rooms of my home, stripped bare of warmth and familiarity. A wave of nausea washed over me. I stumbled to the bathroom, the cold tile a shock against my bare feet. I splashed water on my face, trying to regain some semblance of composure. Looking at myself in the mirror, I saw a stranger staring back, a hollow-eyed, haggard woman, stripped of her dignity, her security, her home. Morning finally arrived, a pale, hesitant dawn filtering through the grimy window. I dressed quickly, my hands trembling as I buttoned my blouse. I had barely touched the stale continental breakfast the motel offered, my stomach churning with a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. I checked out, the clerk barely glancing at me as he handed me my meager belongings. I stepped out into the cool morning air, the city noise assaulting my ears. I hailed a cab, giving the driver the address of Charles Blackwood's office. The ride was a blur, the city streets a kaleidoscope of flashing lights and hurried faces. My mind was focused on the meeting ahead, on the sliver of hope that it represented. Perhaps, just perhaps, there was a way out of this nightmare. Perhaps Robert had foreseen this, had made provisions, had protected me from Victoria's greed. The thought, however improbable, gave me strength. It was a fragile hope, a flickering candle in the darkness, but it was enough to keep me going. It had to be. My future, my dignity, my very survival depended on it. The cab pulled up outside a gleaming office building. I paid the fare and stepped out, taking a deep breath to steady my nerves. This was it. This was my chance. The plush leather of Mr. Henderson's office chair creaked slightly as he leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Mrs. Sullivan," he began, his voice measured and calm. "I understand you have some concerns regarding your late husband's will." I smoothed the worn fabric of my skirt, trying to project an air of composure I didn't quite feel. "Concerns is an understatement, Mr. Henderson. Victoria, my daughter, told me plainly that everything was left to her and Kevin. She said I was to find somewhere else to die. I was given 24 hours to leave my home." I paused, swallowing the lump in my throat. The home Robert and I built together. I find it hard to believe Robert would leave me with nothing, especially after 50 years of marriage. Mr. Henderson nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the document in front of him. "Your husband, Robert Sullivan, was a meticulous man, Mrs. Sullivan. He planned for every contingency. He tapped the will with a manicured finger. "This document is ironclad." However, he trailed off, and I leaned forward, every nerve ending tingling. "However, what?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "However," he repeated, a faint smile playing at the corners of his lips. "There are certain stipulations within the will that might be of particular interest to you." He adjusted his glasses, peering at me over the rims. "Your husband was deeply concerned about your well-being, especially in the event of his passing. He often expressed this concern to me during our meetings." "Robert always worried about me," I admitted, a wave of sadness washing over me. He knew Victoria well. Let's just say they never saw eye to eye on certain matters, especially regarding finances. I remembered Robert shaking his head, muttering about Victoria's extravagant spending habits. He was always afraid she would squander everything he'd worked so hard for. "It seems your husband's foresight was prudent, Mr. Henderson said, his smile widening slightly. He picked up the will again, flipping through the pages. "There is a clause here, on page 4, subsection C, paragraph to a rather ingenious clause, I might add." He looked at me, his eyes twinkling. "It stipulates that in the event of, shall we say, unreasonable or uncaring treatment of you by his beneficiaries, the distribution of assets can be reassessed." My heart began to pound in my chest. "Reassessed," I echoed, barely daring to breathe. "What does that mean exactly?" Mr. Henderson cleared his throat. "It means, Mrs. Sullivan, that if your husband's beneficiaries in this case, Victoria and Kevin Hayes, fail to uphold a reasonable standard of care and respect towards you, the entirety of their inheritance can be revoked and transferred to another designated party." I held my breath, waiting. The silence in the room seemed to stretch on forever. "And who is this designated party?" I finally managed to ask, my voice trembling. Mr. Henderson leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The designated party, Mrs. Sullivan," he said, meeting my gaze directly, "is you." A wave of relief, so potent it almost made me dizzy, washed over me. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the words sink in. Me, Robert had protected me. He had known. He had planned for this. I opened my eyes, looking at Mr. Henderson, a small smile finally gracing my lips. "So, what exactly does this reassessment entail?" I asked, my voice now steady and clear. "Well, Mrs. Sullivan," Mr. Henderson said, a broad smile now spreading across his face, "it entails the transfer of the house, all liquid assets, investments, and properties previously designated to Victoria and Kevin to you." He paused, letting the impact of his words settle. "In total, we are looking at a figure just shy of $33 million. $33 million. The number echoed in my mind, a symphony of sweet revenge. I thought of Victoria's smug face, her condescending tone, the callous way she had dismissed me, discarded me like a broken toy. "Somewhere else to die," she had said. "Well, Victoria, it seems I'll be dying somewhere quite comfortable. Thank you very much. There are, of course, legal procedures we need to follow," Mr. Henderson continued, breaking into my reverie. "We'll need to gather evidence of Victoria's mistreatment. Fortunately, you have a strong case. Evicting you from your home especially given your husband's explicit instructions within the will, is a clear violation. He shuffled some papers on his desk. I'll need you to provide me with a detailed account of everything that transpired. Dates, times, specific conversations, anything you can remember. I'll provide you with everything you need, Mr. Henderson, I assured him, my voice filled with a newfound confidence. Everything. I rose from my chair, feeling lighter than I had in months. The weight of grief and despair that had been crushing me since Robert's death had lifted, replaced by a sense of purpose, of vindication. I looked at Mr. Henderson, a genuine smile now illuminating my face. Thank you, I said sincerely. You have no idea what this means to me. He returned my smile. My pleasure, Mrs. Sullivan. It seems your husband had a very clear vision for your future, and I'm happy to help ensure that vision is realized. I left his office, stepping out into the bright sunshine, the city sounds suddenly seeming less harsh, less overwhelming. I took a deep breath, the crisp autumn air filling my lungs. Victoria thought she had won. She thought she had taken everything. But she had underestimated her father, and she had severely underestimated me. I had a plan now, a plan to reclaim what was rightfully mine, and I couldn't wait to put it into action. The mahogany desk gleamed under the lawyer's lamp, a stark contrast to the dull ache in my chest. Mr. Henderson shuffled some papers, his brow furrowed. Mrs. Sullivan, he began, his voice soft yet firm. I must say, this is unusual. He paused, looking at me over his spectacles. I've reread your husband's will several times now, just to be certain. He cleared his throat. Your daughter, Victoria Sullivan Hayes, and her husband, Kevin Hayes, were quite insistent that you had no legal claim to this estate. I felt a fresh wave of hurt. To be thrown out of my own home, the home Robert and I built together, and then to be told I had no rights, it was almost too much to bear. They presented what appeared to be a valid will, Mr. Henderson continued, leaving everything to Victoria. My hands tightened in my lap. But, he added, a slight smile playing on his lips, your husband was a very meticulous man. He tapped a finger on a thick document. This is the updated will, drafted just a few months before his passing. He didn't inform anyone, not even Victoria. My heart began to race. Could this be it? Could this be the lifeline I so desperately needed? Mr. Henderson adjusted his glasses. It seems your husband anticipated certain difficulties. He glanced at me meaningfully. Difficulties, he repeated, that might rise between you and your daughter regarding his estate. I held my breath, waiting. He included a rather unique contingency clause. He explained, his eyes twinkling now, in the event that his daughter, Victoria Sullivan Hayes, should, how shall I put this, fail to provide him with proper care and respect in his final years, or attempt to dispossess his wife, Margaret Sullivan, from their shared residence, he paused for effect. The entirety of his estate will be transferred to you, Mrs. Sullivan. The words hung in the air, shimmering with a power I hadn't felt in weeks. My mind reeled. The estate, everything mine. Everything, I whispered, my voice barely audible. Mr. Henderson nodded, a genuine smile spreading across his face. Everything. The house, the investments, the liquid assets, everything. He picked up a pen and circled a figure on the document. $33 million, Mrs. Sullivan. All yours. 33 million. The number echoed in my ears, a symphony of disbelief and burgeoning hope. I thought of the cramped, dingy motel room I'd been calling home for the past few weeks. I thought of the stale sandwiches and instant coffee, the constant knot of anxiety in my stomach. And then I thought of Victoria, of her smug face as she handed me a suitcase and told me to find somewhere else to die. A small, involuntary smile touched my lips. There's more, Mr. Henderson continued, interrupting my reverie. Your husband also stipulated that in such an event, the event of Victoria's lack of filial piety, shall we say, she would receive a token sum. He pointed to another figure on the document. $1, to be paid annually on the anniversary of his death. I couldn't help but laugh, a genuine, hearty laugh that bubbled up from deep inside. $1. The irony was exquisite. Victoria, who had been so obsessed with inheriting millions, would now receive a single, solitary dollar every year, a constant reminder of her greed and her failure. Mr. Henderson chuckled softly. He was a very forward-thinking man, your Robert. He gathered the papers, placing them neatly in a folder. I'll need a few days to finalize the transfer of assets, Mrs. Sullivan, he said, but you can rest assured. Everything will be taken care of. I stood up, feeling a strength I hadn't felt in weeks, months even. The weight on my chest had lifted, replaced by a sense of profound relief, and yes, satisfaction. Thank you, Mr. Henderson, I said, extending my hand. Thank you so much. He grasped my hand, his grip firm. My pleasure, Mrs. Sullivan. It's not every day I get to deliver such good news. As I walked out of the lawyer's office and into the bright sunshine, I knew my life was about to change drastically, and I knew exactly what I wanted to do first. The mahogany desk gleamed under the soft lamplight in Mr. Henderson's office. I sat across from him, clutching my worn handbag, the leather warm against my trembling fingers. He cleared his throat, the crisp sound cutting through the quiet. Mrs. Sullivan, he began, his voice gentle yet firm. I've thoroughly reviewed your husband Robert's will. The situation is complex. He paused, adjusting his glasses. Your daughter, Victoria Sullivan Hayes, and her husband, Kevin Hayes, seem to have acted under the assumption that the entirety of Robert's estate would automatically transfer to Victoria upon his passing. I nodded slowly. That's what they told me, I replied, my voice barely a whisper. Victoria said it was her birthright. She said I had no claim to anything. I could still hear Victoria's sharp words echoing in my ears. This house is mine now. You need to find somewhere else to die, Mother. The humiliation burned afresh. Mr. Henderson leaned forward, his expression serious. Mrs. Sullivan, your husband was a very meticulous man. He foresaw certain possibilities. He took steps to protect you. My heart quickened. Protect me, Robert knew. He knew how Victoria could be. He knew what she might do. The lawyer opened a thick folder, revealing a neatly typed document. This is a codicil to your husband's will, executed just a few months before his passing. He pointed to a highlighted paragraph. Robert included a specific clause addressing potential elder abuse or financial exploitation. He stipulated that if Victoria or her spouse acting on her behalf, were to engage in any actions that could be construed as such, including coercion, undue influence, or denial of rightful access to his successor, inheritance would be immediately revoked and transferred to you. I stared at the document, the words blurring before my eyes. Revoked, I whispered, the word barely audible. Transferred tone. Mr. Henderson nodded. Precisely. The evidence you've presented, the eviction notice, the testimonies from your neighbors about Victoria and Kevin's behavior towards you, the sudden change in ownership of the house after Robert's death all point to a clear pattern of coercive behavior. They effectively forced you out of your home, believing it was rightfully Victoria's. They denied you access to your joint accounts, claiming they were now solely Victoria's. This is textbook elder abuse and financial fraud. My mind reeled. Everything Victoria had said, everything she had done, came rushing back to me. Her condescending tone, her dismissive remarks about my burden on the family, Kevin's smug silence as he watched her dismantle my life piece by piece. They had been so sure of themselves, so confident in their greed. And all the while, Robert's plan had been in place, a silent guardian watching over me from beyond the grave. What does this mean exactly? I stammered, my voice still shaky. Mr. Henderson smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. It means, Mrs. Sullivan, that the house, the investment portfolio, the entirety of Robert's estate all belongs to you. I gasped, my hand flying to my mouth. The house, the one Victoria had so cruelly snatched away from me. The investments, the ones she had so gleefully claimed as her own, all mine. He continued, pulling out another document. Furthermore, your husband had a separate life insurance policy, the proceeds of which were also designated to you, held in trust until now. He wanted to ensure you had immediate access to funds, should certain circumstances arise. He handed me the document. This is a certified check for $500,000. Mrs. Sullivan, consider it a down payment on your future. $500,000. The number swam before my eyes. I had been worried about where my next meal would come from, where I would sleep, and now I was holding a check for $500,000. I don't know what to say, I whispered, tears welling in my eyes. There's no need to say anything, Mrs. Sullivan. Mr. Henderson replied kindly. Just let me know if you have any questions. We'll begin the process of transferring the assets immediately. I estimate the total value of the estate, including the life insurance policy and various holdings, to be around $33 million. $33 million. It was a sum I couldn't even fathom, a sum that would change my life forever. And it was all thanks to Robert, to his foresight, and his unwavering love for me. He had protected me, even in death. He had ensured that Victoria's greed would not be rewarded. A strange calm settled over me, replacing the fear and anxiety that had plagued me for weeks. I looked at Mr. Henderson, my voice steady now. There is one thing, I said, a small smile playing on my lips. I believe I'll need your assistance with something involving a certain house and a certain daughter who believes it belongs to her. The crisp air of Mr. Caldwell's office, usually so sterile, felt strangely warm today. My hands, folded tightly in my lap, were still trembling slightly. I'd barely slept since Victoria, my own daughter, had stood in the doorway of my home, the home I'd shared with Robert for 40 years, and told me I needed to find somewhere else to die, Mom, she'd said, her voice dripping with a condescending sweetness that made my stomach churn. Kevin and I need the space. We're starting a family. I'd looked past her, to Kevin lurking behind her, a smirk playing on his lips. He'd nodded, a small, almost imperceptible movement, but enough to send a fresh wave of icy despair through me. Mr. Caldwell, bless his heart, had offered me a comforting smile. Mrs. Sullivan, he began, his voice soft yet steady. I believe we have some rather unexpected news. He paused, shuffling some papers on his mahogany desk. Your husband, Robert, was a very meticulous man. I managed a weak nod, my throat tight. Robert had always been meticulous, a planner, a man who dotted every I and crossed every T. He foresaw certain possibilities, Mr. Caldwell continued, his gaze meeting mine, and he made provisions. My heart thumped in my chest. Provisions? What provisions could Robert possibly have made? He'd left everything to Victoria, hadn't he? That's what she'd told me, anyway. He was concerned, Mr. Caldwell said carefully, about how Victoria might treat you after he was gone. A lump formed in my throat. Robert knew. He knew what she was capable of. He included a specific clause in his will, Mr. Caldwell went on, his voice barely above a whisper. A contingency, if you will. I leaned forward, my breath catching in my chest. A contingency, I repeated, my voice barely audible. Mr. Caldwell cleared his throat. Yes. In the event that Victoria moved you from your home here in any way attempted to disinherit your well, let's just say treated you unkindly, he trailed off, looking at me with a mixture of sympathy and something else, something akin to yes, I urged, my voice shaky. What happens then? Mr. Caldwell took a deep breath. Then, he said, meeting my gaze directly, the entirety of Robert's estate, including the house, all investments, and all liquid assets transferred to you. My mind went blank. I stared at him, uncomprehending. The room seemed to spin. Everything, I whispered, the word barely escaping my lips. Tome, Mr. Caldwell nodded slowly. Everything, Mrs. Sullivan, to you. He leaned back in his chair, a small smile gracing his lips. Robert, he explained, had a rather substantial portfolio. Stocks, bonds, real estate. Was quite the investor. A very shrewd man. I still couldn't speak. My mind struggled to grasp the enormity of what he was saying. He also had several life insurance policies, Mr. Caldwell continued, still smiling. And let's not forget the value of the house itself, situated as it is in such a prime location. He tapped a folder on his desk. All in all, Mrs. Sullivan, he declared, his voice regaining its professional tone, we're looking at approximately $33 million. $33 million. The number echoed in my mind, a dizzying, surreal refrain. $33 million. I had been evicted, discarded, left with nothing but the clothes on my back by my own daughter, and now I was a multimillionaire. I stammered. I don't understand. Mr. Caldwell chuckled softly. It's quite simple, really. Robert loved you very much, Mrs. Sullivan, and he wanted to make sure you were taken care of. He knew his daughter, and he took precautions." He paused, a twinkle in his eye. "He often said," Mr. Caldwell added, his voice laced with amusement, "that Victoria could be persuasive. He wanted to ensure she wouldn't persuade you out of what was rightfully yours." I closed my eyes, a wave of emotion washing over me, relief, gratitude, and a strange sense of vindication mingled together in a potent cocktail. Robert, me dear Robert, had protected me even in death. He had known. He had always known. So I asked, my voice regaining some of its strength, "What happens now?" Mr. Caldwell smiled. "Now, Mrs. Sullivan," he said, "we begin the process of transferring everything into your name." And then he paused, his eyes sparkling. "Then you decide what you want to do with it all." The mahogany desk gleamed under the lawyer's soft lamplight. I smoothed my skirt, a nervous habit I thought I'd broken years ago. "So what happens now?" I asked Mr. Thompson. He shuffled some papers, a small smile playing on his lips. "Now, Mrs. Sullivan," he began, his voice calm and measured, "we inform Victoria Ankoven, was it?" I nodded, the name still bitter on my tongue. "Just days ago, Victoria, my own flesh and blood, had told me to find somewhere else to die. Now, the irony of this situation was almost too much to bear. We informed them of the change in beneficiaries," Mr. Thompson continued, "and commenced the transfer of assets." Assets. The word hung in the air, heavy with meaning. My husband, Robert, had always been meticulous, a planner. He'd known Victoria, perhaps better than I had. "How much are we talking about?" "Exactly," I asked, my voice a mere whisper. Mr. Thompson cleared his throat, a glint in his eye. "Quite a substantial sum, Mrs. Sullivan. The house, of course, is now yours, as are the investment portfolios, the savings accounts, everything stipulated in the original will." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur. "Your husband also had several offshore accounts, quite cleverly concealed. He was a very prudent man." My breath hitched. Robert, always so careful, so quiet. He'd never spoken of offshore accounts. "The total, after taxes and legal fees, comes to just a little over $33 million. $33 million. The number echoed in my ears, a dizzying, unbelievable sum. I stared at Mr. Thompson, my mouth agape. "Millions," I managed to stammer. He nodded, a satisfied smile spreading across his face. "Your husband was a brilliant businessman, Mrs. Sullivan. He anticipated certain eventualities. He tapped the will with his pen. He included a clause, you see, a contingency. Should Victoria fail to uphold her filial duties, to provide you with proper care and respect in your later years." He trailed off, the implication hanging heavy in the air. "So," I said slowly, my mind racing, "Victoria's actions, they triggered this clause." Mr. Thompson nodded. "Precisely. Her insistence that you leave the family home, coupled with her less than respectful communication, fulfilled the conditions outlined in the will." He picked up a pen and circled a section of the document. "This section here specifically addresses the forfeiture of her inheritance in such a scenario. It's all perfectly legal and binding." I reread the clause, my heart pounding. Robert had planned for this. He had known. He had protected me, even from beyond the grave. He knew, I whispered, more to myself than to Mr. Thompson. He knew she might do this, Mr. Thompson simply nodded, a knowing look in his eyes. He was a wise man, your husband. He wanted to ensure you were taken care of, no matter what. A wave of emotion washed over me, relief, gratitude, and a bittersweet pang of sadness for the man who had loved and protected me so fiercely. He had seen Victoria's true colors, the greed lurking beneath the surface, and he had shielded me from it with a plan so intricate, so perfectly executed, that it left me speechless. "So, what about Victoria?" I asked, my voice stronger now, steadier. "What does she get?" Mr. Thompson's smile faded slightly. He picked up another document, a thin sheet of paper. "She receives a token sum, $1, and a letter." He slid the letter across the desk towards me. It was addressed to Victoria in Robert's familiar handwriting. I hesitated, my fingers hovering over the envelope. Part of me wanted to tear it open, to see what he had written to her, to his own daughter. But another part of me held back. This was between them. I don't think I can read this," I said, pushing the letter back towards Mr. Thompson. "Perhaps you could forward it to her." He nodded understandingly. "Of course, Mrs. Sullivan. I'll handle everything." He gathered the papers, a sense of finality settling over the room. "You have nothing to worry about now. You're financially secure." He offered a reassuring smile. "Your husband took care of you, just as he promised he always would." I looked at him, tears welling in my eyes. "He did," I whispered. "He truly did." I rose to leave, a sense of peace washing over me. $33 million. It was a sum I could scarcely comprehend. But it wasn't just about the money. It was about justice. It was about Robert's love and foresight. And it was about a daughter's greed that had finally and spectacularly backfired. As I stepped out of the office and into the crisp evening air, I couldn't help but smile. I had a lot of thinking to do, $33 million worth of thinking. And Victoria, well, I imagined she'd be receiving quite the surprise very soon.